Imagine you're trapped in Nazi Europe in World War II. You might be a captured soldier or a bomber pilot who's been shot down or a refugee. Your survival now depends on your ability to escape. But how do you evade capture in unknown terrain?
Somebody yelled out Germans, and we were absolutely frozen stiff. 50% fear and 50% cold.
Tens of thousands of men and women staked their lives following routes that became known as the Freedom Trails. That's freedom up there. You're not quite home yet. These routes through enemy territory led to safety, but many were extremely perilous.
Si è rischiato tantissimo. Dal primo fino all'ultimo non ne lasciavano uno.
To find them required the help of local resistance fighters who risked their own lives to save others.
Un italiano che salvava gli inglesi veniva fucilato sull'istante.
I want to retrace these routes that have since become legendary. Now we're in the mountains proper. Discover what it took to escape. Pretty claustrophobic space. And meet the ordinary men and women who became heroes in the process.
You helped me to safety. You're a wonderful, wonderful person.
This time I'm in the Pyrenees, the mountain border between France and Spain. Across Europe, resistance opposed to the Nazis set up a series of escape lines called Freedom Trails. The escape lines were run by many brave men and women in order to get thousands of people to safety. And I'm walking one of the most challenging and famous of them all. Of the many freedom trails through France in World War II, one of the most used led across the mountains of the Pyrenees into Spain. It was called the POW line, and it was hugely effective in helping thousands of POWs and refugees escape the Nazis. One particular group, downed Allied airmen, began to increasingly rely on this escape route. As the number of bombing raids over Germany increased, so the number of aircraft shot down increased, as did the number of Allied airmen on the run. Being an Allied airman in World War II was one of the most dangerous jobs imaginable.
The writing was on the wall that when you've done more than 14 knots, boy, you're on borrowed time.
I had blood all over my face, I had my head, and that all cut open from the guns because I was like a bit of salt in a salt shaker.
Every trip I was in fear of my life. I didn't expect to come back. Chances of coming back were slight.
Air crews found it almost impossible to escape enemy fire. Almost half of the RAF's Bomber Command were killed in action.
There was a great thump, and we were hit in the tail unit of the aircraft. The aircraft got out of control, got into a dive. The skipper said, "Bail out, bail out, bail out."
I don't think we'll make England. The motor's getting hot, and at that moment, the propeller fell off.
On his 22nd mission, whilst over Belgium, RAF gunner Bob Frost and his crew started to lose altitude in their Wellington bomber.
The aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire.
At 16,000 feet, Bob donned his parachute and bailed out. He was just 19 years old.
It was jump for it or else. And I'm coming down through the cloud, moaning like hell. It was a Wednesday, Thursday night. We were due to go on leave on the Friday, and I saw my leave disappearing very rapidly. And I was not best pleased when the ground came up and hit me.
Stranded in occupied Belgium, Bob knew the Nazis would be looking for him.
I wasn't going to be caught if I could possibly avoid it.
As more Allied airmen and soldiers became stranded behind enemy lines, a network of escape routes sprung up, run by the resistance, using any means possible to get the troops home to continue the fight. But finding the resistance took courage.
So I went and knocked at the door, hoping some dear old lady would answer, and if she didn't prove friendly, I could run faster than she could.
Luckily, Bob had chanced upon the Belgian resistance. Supplied with new clothes and a new identity, he was helped along one of the escape lines to Paris, a key staging point for any escapee. The invasion of France and the occupation of Paris was a major triumph for Hitler. And with the full collaboration of the Vichy government, he set about covering the city in all the trappings of Nazi occupation and made sure it was in the grip of his feared Gestapo. Despite the dangers, Paris was the starting point for tens of thousands of escapees following the Pat O'Leary line. From there, they headed south to the foothills of the Pyrenees, crossing over the mountains into neutral Spain. Once across the border, they could make their way down to Gibraltar and back home to rejoin the fight. If you turned up in Paris as an Allied airman, the stakes were high. This was an incredibly difficult place to hide under Nazi occupation. The most vital skill was to blend in.
Germaine and Robert looked after me, took me about in Paris. They tried to get you to act as normally as you possibly could. This was not a film. This was for real.
Paris is essentially the departure lounge for the route to freedom that went over the Pyrenees. It was a key stage in the journey because of its major train stations. Although travelling by train was risky, it only took a day to reach the mountains, as opposed to weeks or months by foot. Collecting new escapees as they arrived in Paris and helping prepare them for the journey south were resistance fighters like Michelle Agniel. Michelle Agniel worked for one of the escape networks in Paris. She was a teenager at the time and lived at home with her parents and her brother. And home was also a safe house for escaping airmen. And she's very kindly agreed to meet me and show me how it was done. Bonjour, bonjour, je m'appelle Monty. Nice to meet you too. I brought you some cakes. My pleasure.
Have a coffee.
Oh, yes, please. That would be wonderful. Michelle was 17 and had just returned to Paris from the countryside when her parents told her they had a guest.
My father and my mother was waiting me at the train, and they told me, "Oh, we have a surprise for you."
We have some guests.
And I wanted to know, but I never imagined it was the first American we had home. He was a very, and he said, "Hello, Michelle."
Wow. And how many did you look after?
20, about 20.
It must have been very nervous moving them through Paris.
Yes.
Lots of German soldiers.
Yes, but they don't know, they don't imagine a lot. So many pilots who are going in Paris under their nose.
Yes, amazing. New arrivals were met by people like Michelle.
To help the American and English who are coming from outside, who are taken to Paris, told them, you have to follow the blue-beret girl.
Girl in the blue beret. And how did you know it was them?
Because they arrived with somebody we knew.
Ah, I see, I see. And then this was the handover.
Then they left him at the train, and we take them. We took them, and they follow us at the same time.
Yeah. Michelle found some nationalities easier to hide than others.
Some of them, especially Americans, because they are so much higher, just
Tall.
like tall,
Yes.
than the French people. The American looks like they are drunk a little bit.
They look like they're drunk. Oh, so they kind of swagger
Yes.
like this. That's how an American
Yes.
walks. If I was an American and I came to you and I walked around Paris like this...
Just like that, just like that.
So you think then I'd be caught?
I think some of them were very proud to be Americans,
Yes.
especially Americans.
Well, it's good to be proud of your country, but it's not good to be proud to be an American in Paris in the Second World War, I don't think. It must have been unimaginable for
Yes, but
French people.
It was a shock.
Yeah,
shock.
Yes.
Yes.
These were your boys.
Yes.
You looked after them.
Yes.
Did they all make it home?
Yes.
How long did they stay with you?
2 weeks.
2 weeks or not long?
Not very long.
Yeah.
The time to have their photography, their identity cards made, and the time to have
New clothes.
clothes. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Voilà.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure
Yes,
to meet
it was
you.
a pleasure for me too.
Wonderful. Well, what a remarkable experience that was, and what a privilege to meet Michelle. She's an extraordinary woman to this day. She's defiant and formidable and redoubtable. The Freedom Trails weren't just physical routes. They were individuals like Michelle. They were a spirit, an ethos of defiance of the occupier. And although the men and women who went over the Freedom Trails needed brawn to do it, to get over these mountain routes, to survive at this stage in Paris, they needed bottle and they needed brains as well. If caught, the fate of those resistance helpers was concentration camps or death. Michelle Agniel suffered for her kindness. A betrayal led to her capture, and she was taken to Ravensbrück, the largest female-only concentration camp of the Second World War.
In my opinion, they are the heroes, knowing that not only their own life, but the lives of their families were at risk.
And without such personal sacrifices and huge bravery, make no mistake, there would have been no route home. There would have been no Freedom Trail. But for servicemen like Bob Frost, their Freedom Trail had barely begun. Ahead of them lay the perilous journey across the Pyrenees. I'm in Paris following the Pateau-Léry line, one of the most famous escape routes out of occupied Europe during the Second World War. Over the course of the war, the escape lines assisted thousands of servicemen and refugees onto trains bound for the border with Spain. The resistance took huge risks smuggling escapees onto these trains. Some of the resistance were even braver and would deliberately disrupt the German soldiers.
Anything they could do to upset the Germans, they did so that in places like railway stations, anything that happened there, you bumped into a German, you stole his pocketbook or whatever you could, and that got him into trouble.
Once they'd safely boarded a train, the escapees had to head south to reach the foothills of the Pyrenees, where the hardest part of their journey began. If you were lucky as an Allied airman, you'd catch a train from Paris to Toulouse and from there to the small town of Saint-Géron, which was a launch point over the Pyrenees. But the problem was that the town had been taken over by the Germans on the 8th of November 1942, and they still occupied it. That meant it was a very difficult and dangerous place to find a guide. Bob Frost crossed the Pyrenees following a different route. Travelling in a group including an American airman, a moment of carelessness almost blew their cover.
When we'd gone through Paris, we were taken by train, and there were 6 of us by this time. And Del Mounts had been dozing, looked up and saw a woman standing outside the door, forgot himself completely, and said, "Say, ma'am, would you like my seat?" She said, "Thank you very much," in English, and we all waited for the whole world to crumble about our ears. Not a thing happened.
This really was a journey into the complete unknown for anyone arriving into the town. They had no idea who'd be waiting for them there. It could have been the Germans, could have been the French police. Hopefully it was a member of the resistance. The Gestapo had set up a local headquarters in Saint-Giron, right by the railway station, an intimidating sight for anyone arriving there. Arrival required a coordinated and clandestine effort if they were going to be met safely. It must have been truly nerve-wracking. In the final moments of their train journey, escapees would have been listening closely. As the train approached Saint-Giron, the train driver would give 3 toots on the horn, and that meant that anyone on board who was escaping should jump off before getting to the station, which might have French police or Germans there. Once in Saint-Giron, escapees faced the toughest part of the line, the mountains themselves. It was called the Pat O'Leary line, as this was the code name of a Belgian army doctor who took over its command. His real name was Albert Marie Jaurès, and he ran the line from 1941 to 1943. Known for his bravery and humanity, he was instrumental in helping thousands to freedom.
My father was a secret agent working during the war against the Nazis. I am proud of my father because what he did was extraordinary. These are the medals from my father. So these were probably the most important for him. That's the Légion d'honneur français, French, and this one is the George Cross. My father is the only non-British people to have the George Cross.
In 1943, O'Leary was betrayed and spent 2 years in Dachau concentration camp, where he was tortured. He never disclosed any information to his German captors. In 1980, 9 years before he died, O'Leary was honoured with another medal, making him one of the most decorated figures of World War II.
That is the last medal my father received. It's the highest medal coming from Great Britain. It is the KBE Knight of the British Empire.
This is the beautiful old town of Saint-Giron. And as you can see, it's an old medieval place, the end destination for many of the escapees. And you'd think quite an easy place to hide in. Those are the foothills of the Pyrenees. This is the gateway to the mountain range. Just beyond there, you've got the main mountains, which effectively is the border between France and Spain. But this is a base camp. This is a jumping off point. It was the place where people came if they wanted to cross the mountains to freedom. But the problem was that the Germans knew that. And so they flooded this area with intelligence, with surveillance, with agents. So coming to Saint-Giron, if you're an airman on the run, was very important, but also very, very dangerous. As one escape line was discovered by the Nazis, another would spring up elsewhere. As lower versions of the O'Leary line were compromised, the route was forced higher and higher into the mountains. The route we're following was the highest and toughest of them all, forced by a series of betrayals within the line itself. The O'Leary line was now running, and it was a huge success. And one of the figures within it was called Captain Harold Cole. He was an Englishman, and several escapers commented on his audacity and bravery in terms of getting them across the line. But Captain Harold Cole was not all he appeared to be. Harold Cole was actually a petty criminal before the war, and he lied about his credentials to join the British Army. He ended up running part of the Pat O'Leary line, but was actually stealing funds from the line and was confronted by Pat O'Leary himself. He managed to escape from that meeting, and he went over to the Germans. And with him, he took 30 pages of names and addresses of almost the entire network of the line. Harold Cole was one of the worst British traitors of the entire war. Due to Cole's activities, the Pat O'Leary line had been completely compromised. 150 members of the network had been arrested, including, it was rumoured, Pat O'Leary himself. And 50 of those members were executed. If the line was going to survive, it was going to have to shift. And it did shift. But to much higher and much more dangerous terrain. An estimated 33,000 escapees crossed these mountains during the war. Allied airmen made up just a small fraction of that group. The vast majority were Jewish refugees. One of these, Berry Asher, has left us an account of what the refugees faced on the crossing. He, along with many other Jews, was helped to freedom by the Dutch resistance fighter Joop Westerwelle. Berry Asher writes about Westerwelle, and he says that in Saint-Giron, others joined our group, shot down Allied pilots, older French Jews, and even 2 women. We were 32 people now, including 23 from the Netherlands. Saturday afternoon, we were surprised by Joop Westerwelle, who specially had come from Holland to say farewell and to wish us a safe and sound trip. Asher speaks very emotively of that visit from Westerwelle, because he said that Westerwelle sat the group down and said, "You are witnesses now. You are witnesses to what is happening to the Jewish people. Go and tell the world." I'm in the Pyrenees following the Pat O'Leary line, one of the toughest escape routes out of occupied Europe during the Second World War. Thousands of servicemen, POWs and refugees used it to reach Spain. The O'Leary line had been forced into the high Pyrenees, which made it a much more difficult crossing, but it also reduced the chances of running into German patrols. Escapees were passed from link to link in the chain by a succession of resistance helpers. Having reached the foothills, they would then be passed to a local guide to help navigate them through the mountains. My expert guides, Paul Williams and George Manley, regularly take people on this route. They have the knowledge and expertise to make this crossing safely. Our first stop is not far from Saint-Giron, a cabin where Berry Asher and his group were thought to have taken refuge before heading to Spain. The building behind me is very significant because, without a doubt, this is where escapees would have gathered, and not just Allied airmen and servicemen. We're talking about refugees, people on the run for their lives, and this is where they gathered their thoughts, got their logistics together, but also braced themselves, ready to head into the mountains. This is where they stopped being escapees and became mountaineers. And for me, this is where my journey begins as well. This route involves climbing thousands of feet up and down over a series of 3 mountain ridges as we head for the border with Spain. With the help of Paul and George, we plan to take 3 days to cross. For many, it took a week, and for some, it took their lives. This was a very different place in winter. It's a world of snow and ice and hypothermia and blizzards. It's a place of a mountaineer. It's not a place of an ill-equipped escapee, but of course, there's that powerful motivating force. You're running for your life and fleeing Nazi persecution.
Beryasha, a Jewish refugee, wrote an account of his own journey across the Pat-O'Leary line, which shows just how unprepared many of the escapees were. We left in a long row. Adrienne walked ahead. We walked most of the night. We were allowed only to take a backpack and a stick. Adrienne handed out the provisions, a piece of bread, some sugar, and a little meat. A quantity for a trip of about 2 days, because he said within that time we'd be in Spain. They would not see Spain for 6 days.
There's a danger that the Second World War becomes this sepia-tinted thing. It's historical. It's not really relevant. It's totally relevant because, you know, these phenomenal feats of human endurance and survival just makes you realise who you descended from.
Yes. And it's also the qualities that people demonstrated during the war. Obviously, some awful things went on, but it also brings the best out in people.
Oh, I think you see the very best and the very worst of human nature.
Yeah.
And that's a consistent story throughout the Second World War, I think.
Yeah.
People sacrificing everything to help total strangers.
Yes.
That's happened at the Freedom Trails.
Yeah.
But in those same Freedom Trails, people were being betrayed. People like Bob Frost and Beryasha, and all the other folk who made the run over these mountains. They showed tremendous physical fortitude, of course they did, but they also showed huge mental strength. The vast majority of them had been hassled and harried all the way through their evasion, often through the whole of France. And so to get here and still have the determination and still have what it takes to do this epic ascent over these mountains meant they were pretty special people, I think. Water was a real problem for everyone going over the mountains because they tended to go over in winter. And high up, there's no water up there. It's all frozen, there's no streams, and it's a real effort to get over there. You're working really hard, you're sweating and you're dehydrating. As the war progressed, escape was only possible through the higher parts of the mountain range, the Pyrenees. And this was particularly applicable after 1943 for the Pat-O'Leary line, because it was compromised, it was betrayed. And what that meant is anyone using the line had to go higher and higher, more altitude, obscure routes, and that forced them into a lethal environment.
Most people crossing these mountains were painfully ill-equipped for these conditions. Many escapees suffered from frostbite, which could turn to gangrene.
Dressed as we were, that was how we crossed over the Pyrenees, being led by a real smuggler, Florentino Guy. He stopped from time to time by a bush, rake about inside it and come out with a bottle of brandy, pass it round, and that was our sustenance going over the mountains to the other side.
Just think for a moment of Bob Frost. It's 1938, you're 19 years old, and you're a bank clerk. You enjoy your work, and then war breaks out. So you do the right thing, you join up. You become a rear gunner in a bomber. You do 10 missions, then you get shot down over Belgium. You're still a young lad. You're just out your teens by this stage. And yet, you then have to go undercover. You have to go on the run, become a secret agent, live by your wits. And you do that for months. And then, the final transformation is becoming a mountaineer and taking on this. And you fail at any one of those, and you're gonna die.
We've been walking for 5 hours and are making good progress.
So we started here, Monty.
Yep.
and we've worked our way along this path.
Even with the aid of the resistance, escaping Nazi-occupied Europe was so challenging that the British government set up MI9 to help. MI9 was a branch of the British Secret Service, specifically created to support escape and evasion.
Now, Paul's just shown me where we are, using a map and obviously a compass as well. Now, you're not going to get too far without a compass. You might have your expert guide in the mountains, but you've got to get here in the first place. So if you're an airman, an escapee, you're on the run, a refugee, you need some way of finding your way. And extraordinarily enough, this is what the airmen on the run used. They used razor blades. There was a fantastic guy called Clayton Hutton, and he was the Q of the time of MI9, and he invented all sorts of wonderful things. And he invented magnetic razor blades that pointed north, and these are examples of them. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that on the rock, and obviously that way's north, and then I'm going to see if it works, basically. So here we go. I'm going to stick it down here on the rock. So that's north. So all you need is a bit of water to put your razor blade on. Because it's magnetised, it should swing round. Right, here we go. So it needs to just float on the meniscus. I'll give it a moment to settle. You can see that movement, and that's because it's magnetised. It's finding north. So just give it another moment. There you go. That's north. Isn't that fantastic? After all these years, it still works. Well done, Clutty.
We need to keep moving if we're going to make it to shelter before it gets dark.
So we're nearly at journey's end for today.
For day one, that's right. Yep.
Excellent.
We can just see through the cloud, the ridge we have to cross tomorrow.
Wow.
We've had a relatively easy first day, but I'll still be happy to see my bed. Escapees in World War II had to do this running on empty. Bob was part of a group being led over the Pyrenees by their guide Florentino and had started to flag.
I fell into a hole. I was the last of the 6 people going, and I landed in this hole and I hadn't got any breath left in me at all. Florentino saw what had happened, came back, got hold of me like a drowned rat, lifted me out and plonked me on the side.
The morning once again reveals what a truly beautiful place this is, along with the scale of our next challenge.
There it is. That is absolutely beautiful. Wow. That is really something, really something. Montvalier. And a majestic, awesome spectacle for a guy who's wearing the right kit, well fed. But imagine being here. You're a completely exhausted refugee. You're wearing normal shoes. You're wearing a suit. You're carrying a case. You're wearing a Homburg hat. All of these things happen on these trails, and you're faced with that. This was one of the problems with going through the Pyrenees. You weren't just doing one hill. You were doing a series of huge, inhospitable, very dangerous ridges. You're doing this again and again and again. It's like going along a Toblerone bar.
After this ridge, we still have 2 more to cross, and for the escapees, the terrain would only get tougher as they headed for the snow line.
Let's push on.
Let's do it.
I'm in the Pyrenees following the POW line, one of the most famous escape routes out of occupied Europe during the Second World War.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Well done, well held. crystal clear.
Accompanied by my guide, Paul, we continue along the second leg of our journey. Day 1, we reached an altitude of over 7,000 feet, our first ridge known as the Col de Cruzet. Col meaning saddle, so the lowest point we could cross. Today we're heading for our second, even higher ridge, known as the Col de Pécuche.
Whee!
If you find the wobbly one, that's luck. Good luck.
Same noise my knees are making at the moment. Doesn't feel like good luck. Feels like rather bad luck, actually. The resilience, the skills, the fortitude, the guides, but you needed luck.
I think so. Sometimes, to make a home run, yeah.
It's said that 33,000 people made it over the Pyrenees, the whole length of the Pyrenees during the war.
About 3,500 Allied servicemen. Yeah.
Many, many hundreds of people died, possibly thousands. We'll never know.
We'll never know. We still have several hundred metres of ascent.
Yeah. All right, up we go.
This may well have been the hardest route through the Pyrenees, and in winter, when many people made this crossing, these mountains would have been covered in ice and snow. Temperatures could drop to minus 15 degrees centigrade.
We're just getting into the snow line now. Now this stuff, we associate it with fun. You know, snowballs and skiing and Christmas and all that. This is lethal stuff if you're on the run. You can't really see the route. If you don't know the route, you're in trouble. Getting into the higher stuff here, where the snow is a really lethal environment.
Jewish refugee Berry Asher wrote about their battle with the elements in his account of their escape. Slowly but surely, it was getting more difficult and more dangerous. When we finally passed the tree line, we saw just endless snow and ice fields. We walked like robots along deep ravines and knew no more of time or hours. As we get closer to our second and penultimate peak, our ascent gets more demanding.
So, Paul, it's pretty unequivocal, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is where you would cross this ridge.
You're looking for the lowest point
Yeah.
on the ridge, and that's it.
Now that
Is a view.
That was worth the walk. That was worth the walk. Look at that. That is a truly celestial view. Sort of utterly inspiring and completely depressing at the same time, because I know
because we have to
keep going, don't we?
Them.
That's amazing.
Our third barrier.
So that's it. That's where we're staying. Please say yes.
Yes, that's the refuge where we're staying tonight.
Excellent. It looks so close from here, doesn't it? After you. Lead on,
Okay.
as ever.
As we head down to the cabin, we know that it's safe and warm, and we'll each have a bed. For the likes of refugee Berry Asher, travelling with a group of 32, it was a very different story. The snow was now covered with an ice pack, and it was so slippery that despite our sticks, we frequently fell. We reached the hut at 2,500 metres altitude at 4:30 in the morning. The hut was so small that there was not enough room for everyone. Some lay down to sleep. The others tried sleeping leaning against a wall. Today is our third and final day, and according to Paul, it will be our toughest. Refreshed and warmed by a welcome cup of coffee, we take stock of where we are before the final push.
Many of the people who came here had been on the run for months.
Yeah.
Months and months. Hunted, persecuted, desperate. And here they were. The border almost runs along the top of that range there, doesn't it?
You can't see where we're going to cross, but in fact, we are looking at the border now.
Yeah.
And this area is steeped in history. There would have been the modern refuge replaced a smaller building that people would have stayed in. There's a plaque to people who refused Nazi oppression and escaped to fight for freedom.
Well, speaking of history, and the incredible history of where we're sitting, this probably had a bigger impact on the volume of people who escaped and was probably the #1 asset and tool. And it's a silk map.
Silk map.
So it's very nice to look at this amazing modern map put together with technology, satellite imagery. But this was created by Clutty, the famous guy from MI9, who was the Q of the day. And there's all sorts of incredible things about this silk map. The first one is illustrated the moment I open it. It's completely silent. You don't get this.
Yeah.
You're not giving yourself away. It's incredibly light. It can be crunched up. And these were the things that inspired prisoners to try and escape, inspired Allied airmen who were shot down to say, yeah, we're going to make a run for the border because we know where it is.
We've got a chance.
I think they're wonderful things, but I'm not sure we should use them to navigate today. No, let's stick to that one. It's like the Pyrenees sort of throws a series of challenges at anyone trying to do this. And it's almost like it saves the best till last, doesn't it? It's like you are so close now. You're so close after months on the run of achieving your aim. So I'm going to give you one last humdinger of a challenge, and it's that.
You ready? Let's do it.
Having crossed miles of truly arduous terrain and experienced severe and unpredictable weather conditions, the escapees were now faced with a final, grueling ascent of over 1,900 feet. Though the situation in Spain was complex and not without risk, it offered them their best chance of safety. It's extraordinary to think that this route was taken by thousands of men, women, and children over the course of the war, and often in darkness.
Is the actual border physically on that ridge?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, there's no way that it's marked, but you can tell by the map that it has to be there. Think how hard it would be up to your knees or higher.
An effort.
Or even worse, sort of just the boot going in, and then every sort of 10th step you...
This would have come at the end of months on the run, possibly, wouldn't it, Paul? And
yes,
and hundreds of miles.
Yeah.
And now they had 100 meters to go.
Yep.
And I think that 100 meters, just adrenaline, you know.
With the border in sight.
Joy. It's very theatric because you've got this great ridge there that slowly reveals.
And there, we're looking into Spain.
Hola. Hola, Español. What a sight. And you view it as a free man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally.
Free man or a free woman.
You could be stood here, 1 foot in Spain, 1 foot in France.
And you come up that slope as a hunted prisoner or refugee, and you stand here as a free citizen of the world.
Yeah.
How fantastic.
Seeing the lights of Spain meant so much. There's freedom on that other side.
I've often thought during the course of this journey that for the people who did this, 3,500 servicemen, 33,000 people did this. Yeah. For the rest of their lives, I think they could say, yeah, we did something a bit special.
We didn't realise at the time, I suppose, how deep it was inside us. What an experience it was.
Of course, in the Second World War, there were many freedom trails all over Europe, but nothing matches the scale of this one. And it wasn't just the height of the Pyrenees, it was the thousands of people involved in a network to get people to the foot of the mountains. Thousands of people went over the Pyrenees, the airmen, the soldiers, the refugees. And there's monuments to many freedom trails around Europe. But I think for this one, all you need as a monument is the mountains themselves.
The whole business of war to me is senseless. Man's failure to live what could be such a wonderful life. We don't seem to have advanced very far in that. And I believe now that if at the end of your days you're able to say, I've left the world a little bit better than I found it. And in my case, it's thinking, we're here, we're free. You can walk out of this door as free as the wind. If you want to go and do anything, you've got the opportunity to go and do it. And what I would suggest is, do it well.